morning, everyone, and wishing you all a very happy new year and a warm welcome to today's session, which is Mastering Mistakes in Sage 50 Payroll. And over the next 45 minutes, we will explore how to identify and correct common payroll errors with confidence. My name is Sarah, and today I'm joined in the background by my colleague Duncan, who will be keeping an eye on the Q&A panel throughout the session. So if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to pop them there and he will pick those up. So we'll begin by looking at an introduction to some common payroll mistakes, and then we'll move on and explore the two main correction methods, so restoring backups and using the rollback option. We'll also cover how to submit corrections to HMRC and adjust employees' pay, pension, and anything else to consider. And then finally, we'll finish things off by running through some further support and resources as well. So with all of that said, let's get started with a bit of an introduction. So mistakes happen. You know, you might overpay or underpay someone. You might miss a statutory payment, might use the wrong information, so wrong tax code or NI category, might use the wrong date, or you might have an error with something like a pension as well. So that's a few examples of things that can go wrong when you're processing your pay run, but today we'll show you how to fix these problems. So when it comes to actually correcting a mistake, you do have a couple of different options. So the two main ways to correct errors. You might correct your error in the next pay run. So what this means, it means you won't actually have to change any of the employee's history. But this would mean that the employee would need to wait till the next pay period for that correction to take effect. Second option is to reprocess your payroll. So that's to reprocess the original pay period. And this is the one that we'll be focusing on today. So you'd be going back to the original pay period, entering your corrected values, submitting an FPS adjustment, and then adjusting the employee's pay and any payments to HMRC as well. And like I said, this is the one that we'll be looking at closely today. So there are a few things to consider before you actually go down the route of reprocessing payroll. So before correcting, you want to gather original data, so things like pay slips, P32 reports, pension records, any nominal transactions for use the nominal link. And you also want to consider what year the correction is in. So is it in the current year? So was it just a mistake that you've made recently? Or is it going to be something a little bit later on? So definitely something to consider, but we will show you both ways today in the demo. So one in the current year and one in the previous tax year as well, because that does matter. That is important because the way that you're then going to make your correction will differ dependent on that. So definitely important to note these things down. You then want to consider how you're going to make the correction. So there are a few different ways that you can go back in Sage 50 Payroll. So are you going to use the restore or the recover option, or are you going to use the rollback option instead? But remember, you are going to have to reprocess any later periods as well. So that is something to bear in mind. So is it a recent mistake, or are you going to have to reprocess a lot of pay periods? You then want to consider about what's going to happen after you've made the correction. So how is it you're going to go about adjusting the employee's pay and what you've paid to HMRC if you've already paid over your liability? Do they have a pension? It might be, dependent on what correction you're doing, that the pension contribution needs adjusted with the provider as well. And of course, you're going to want to send things like an FPS adjustment or an updated EPS to inform HMRC of any changes to those figures. So definitely a few things to bear in mind, and if you consider all of these, that's going to be the best way you're going to be prepared to make your correction. So I've already mentioned a couple of the ways that you can make a correction, but the main two are going to be your restore and your rollback options. So I do want to look at restoring a backup first. So as you probably all know, payroll is going to prompt you to take backups at various points during your payroll process. So you probably notice it if you run a pension assessment. But you might store these yourself, maybe on a particular location in your PC, maybe a shared drive or on a memory stick maybe. And you would use that restore option to go back to that particular moment in time. If you've lost your backup or you maybe forgotten to take one on that occasion, then you can use the recover option instead. And what the recover option does, that's just going to use the backup that your payroll takes automatically in the background when you click on update records. So that option is handy when you want to restore back, but you've maybe forgotten to take a backup or you've lost the backup that you wanted to restore. Now, using recover or restore is going to be like taking a step back in time. So it will override all the existing data on your payroll with the data from that backup. So it is best to use this option if it affects all or most of your employees. So that is something to definitely bear in mind. So depending on the nature of the correction you're doing, if it's an error that affects everyone or maybe the majority of the people on your payroll, then this is probably going to be the option that you want to use. So I do want to take a look at the process of actually restoring the backup. So when you go to File and then Restore, you're going to see this window. Now, the only thing that you want to select is Data Files, and that is going to be the only thing that's highlighted by default. You can see there is a list of other files that you can restore, for example, RTI files, but you don't want to be selecting this unless in very specific circumstances. So, for example, if our technical support team has told you to do so. If you select it for a normal correction, I do want to stress this can result in issues with duplication of HMRC liability, which obviously no one wants. So please just be a little bit cautious when you're in this window. And I would definitely recommend taking a backup before you restore. Then if anything does go wrong, or if you maybe select a file by mistake, then you can always just restore your earlier backup and start the process again. So it's always good to have a little bit of a safety net. So with that said, I do want to do a little bit of a demo on restoring back. I'm just going to bring these slides down and jump into my payroll. So I'm in my payroll and I've processed my December payroll. I'm all up to date for my monthly payroll. Now I do take backups regularly, and I take on pre-update and post-update, and I save these on my PC. So I'll just drag this across here. And you can see I've got my backups in a backups folder, and I label my backups pre and post update as well. So it is quite important to label your backups, because if you ever do want to restore back, then it's just going to help you out in knowing exactly when that backup was taken. So I'm going to go ahead and restore back to November. So say I maybe processed someone's pay incorrectly in December. So I want to be just pre-update for my December payroll so I can amend December and get that corrected. So the process of restoring a backup, you do want to start at File in the top left. And then you want to go down to Restore. Now, if it is a recent backup that you want to restore, it might be that it shows in this list here. But don't worry if it doesn't. You can always browse to it a little bit later on. I'm now going to select Next. And you can see that list of files that we talked about earlier. So as you can see, data files is selected by default, and that's right. I just want to restore my data. I've already sent my FPS for December, so I don't need to send that again. I would just be adjusting against the FPS that I've sent. So I'm not going to touch anything else in this window, and I'm just going to continue on. This is now going to let me browse to my backups. So I want to go to my December pre-update so I can amend some figures. So that's the one I'm going to select from my backups folder. I'm going to select next. And then I'm just going to finish. Payroll will then load the backup and it'll prompt you just as one last security step to enter your password. Now, once this loads, what you'll notice is that we do have a change of dates here. So you can see my last updated date has now changed back to November, but my last FPS date will remain in December. And remember, the reason for that is we're not going to send a full FPS again, as that would inflate our liability. We'll just be adjusting against our December one, and that will send across any changes to HMRC. So now I'm restored back. I would essentially just follow my payroll process again with my corrected figures. So I would be changing my processing date to the 31st of December. And then I would be reprocessing as usual. So we will be entering corrected payments, rerunning a pension assessment, regenerating our pre-update reports, so re-uploading our online pay slips, updating our records with the new updated figures, and then finally sending off an FPS adjustment. But we will take a closer look at the reprocessing steps a little bit later on in the webinar. Now I'm just going to go ahead and restore back up to date, as we'll be taking a look at the rollback option a little bit closer. Now, something else I do want to show you just whilst we're in here, and I did mention this earlier, is the recover option. So the recover works in the same way as restoring. However, it uses the backups that Payroll takes automatically in the background whenever you're updating your records. So this one's handy if you do want to restore back, but you've maybe lost the backup that you've taken manually, or you've forgotten to take one. So you can get to recover by going to tasks and down to recover. It will come up with a recover wizard, but instead of you having to browse to a backup, I just click next, you can see that it gives me backups to actually choose from. So what you would be doing is you would be selecting that backup, and that would take you to the point just before you've updated your records. So this one's handy to use if you don't have your own backup to hand. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and restore anything just yet. I'm just going to cancel out of there. Remember, these two options, so your restore and your recover, they're going to be suitable for mistakes that affect all or most of your employees. So that is a bit more on the recover and the restore options to correct your payroll. But what we will be focusing on today in more detail is the rollback option, which is quite different from your restore or your recover option. So with the rollback option, you can remove payment history for selected employees only. So this is really great if you only have one employee or maybe a handful of employees on your payroll to correct. It's when you go into the rollback wizard, it'll then ask you what period you want to go back to and reprocess from, as you can see on the screenshot just on the right there. But what you'll notice is it will only display your current tax year that you're currently in. So it'll go off based off your processing date. If you do need to go back to previous tax years, you would need to roll back in chunks, but we will take a closer look at that in the demonstration. So with all of that said, let's get jumped into payroll and look at the rollback option. So we are going to look at two different scenarios today. So first scenario that I want to look at is a current year correction. So a current tax year correction. So employee 9 actually had a birthday last month in December, but as you all know, December is a very busy month. A lot going on, a bit of a rush to get everything done early. So I've simply just forgotten to change his category. So if I just go into the employee record, you can see in the personal tab, his birthday was on the 10th of December. But if I was to check my history, I can see that he wasn't changed over. So I need to change that from category A to category C. So I'm just going to double check my processing date. I'm going to set that to December. So that is the processing date I am going to correct. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run my historical payslip. So I'm going to go into reprint and payslips, pop the date in, so 31st of December. I'm just going to run a laser payslip for this employee. And I'm just going to do this so I have the original figures. So when I do my reprocessing, I can then compare and look at the difference in the net pay. So I'm just going to minimize that for now. Got my historical pay slip. So I'm now going to roll back my employee 9. So to do that, I'm going to highlight the one employee that I want to roll back, as it will go off whoever's selected, or if no one's selected, it will pick up everyone. So I'm going to go to tasks just up at the top, and I'm going to go down to rollback. Now you can see it will prompt you to take a backup before you do this, which I would strongly recommend. But in the essence of time, I already have saved my backup. So I am just going to click next to continue. You can see on the next page, employee 9 has flagged up there because that's the employee that I've got highlighted. And I'm going to click next. And now I can see my list of pay periods in my current tax year. Now, good news for me is it's only my last pay period that I need to correct. So I'm just going to select December's pay period, so tax month 9, because that's the earliest payroll update I want to remove and reprocess. So I'm going to keep that selected and click next. And then I'm going to go and finish. See, I get a nice process complete message there. And then what you'll notice on the employee list is that the last updated date has changed, but only for this one person. So that's going to allow me to reprocess for employee 9 and send that correction off without actually removing any of my other data. So I'm going to crack on with my correction now. So I'm going to go into my employee record, as it was an NI category change. Go along to the employment tab and change my employee from an A to a category C. I'm going to save the record and lock that change in there. Now that I've changed what I need to in the record, I can go back to payroll. Now I've already changed my processing date, and I can double check that in the bottom right just there by looking at my status bar. So you can see that's set to the 31st of December 2025, which is matching the last FPS date, which is exactly what I want. I'm going to go through my payroll process. So I'm going to go in and enter payments for employee 9. And I can see straight away that change has taken effect because I can see the NIC has now dropped off. The overtime and the salary are looking spot on, so I'm just going to save that. Now from here, you might rerun a pension assessment. You'd be going into your pre-update reports. So I'm going to get an updated payslip for this pay period. And remember, I ran the historical one earlier on. I can upload an online payslip if they are using Sage HR. And if that is the case, what would happen is it would replace the old incorrect payslip that's on the portal. So they'd get an updated one, it wouldn't duplicate it. And then once that's all done, I'm ready to re-update my records for December for employee 9. So I'm going to go ahead and update the records. Just to lock those new changes in. So now I've updated my changes. I can see my last updated date and my last FPS date are now matching again. And that's a good signal to me that I'm now ready to do my FPS adjustment for this employee. And to do that, you can do that from your payroll tasks just on the left here, or you could do it from e-submissions as well. So a couple different places you can send that adjustment. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to fill out my late reason, which is just a correction to my submission. And I'm going to press OK. I can see employee 9 is on there, which is exactly what I want. Now, a couple of things just to bear in mind with the FPS adjustment. I'm just going back one pay period at the moment, but if you are correcting more than one pay period, for example, if you are making a correction in May, but you have processed up to December, the liability adjustment in this window here will only show the difference for your most recent pay period. It is absolutely nothing to worry about. It does throw some people off, but any prior periods that you've corrected will be submitted as a year-to-date correction in the background of the submission. So you'll only submit at the point when payroll is up to date. So just something to bear in mind, a couple of things there with the adjustment, because that can throw a few people off. But my rule of thumb is if you're happy with what you've reprocessed and you're happy with the reporting that you've reproduced, then go ahead and submit it and it will get it corrected. So I'm happy with that. I'm just going to go ahead and send that adjustment off to HMRC. And then we'll look at our second scenario. So that's all done and dusted and submitted across. So that's employee 9 all sorted. Now I do actually have another correction to make, but this time it's for employee 6. Now employee 6 got an end of year bonus and that was actually paid in March. Now it came to light that they should have actually gotten a higher bonus in March. So I need to roll back to the previous tax year to correct that. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to again go into reprint and pay slips, and I'm going to run the pay slip from March just so I have a copy of the original figures. I can see the bonus on there, it's £500, but it should have actually been 750. So I'm going to keep that handy. So I've got a copy of the original data. Now, because we are going back to the previous tax year, I did touch on this earlier, the rollback will work in chunks. So before I can go back into last tax year, I am going to need to roll back my current year first. So to do that, I would still go to tasks and down to rollback. My processing date is in my current tax year. So the rollback wizard is going to show me those dates. Again, strongly recommended you take a backup at this point, but I already have one. So in the essence of time, I'm just going to continue through. So employee 6 on there. And I'm going to need to remove all of my current year so I can then get back to my previous tax year. So you can see because my processing date's in this year, it's only this tax year that's shown, and I want to remove it all. So I'm going to go right down to tax month 1 and clear all of the data. I'm just going to go next and finish. Now this can catch some people out. This will pop up if you are selecting the oldest update on this tax year, on your relevant tax year, and you do want to select no to this message. So it is a message to be careful about. Quite easy to just kind of skip through it, but you do want to select no to this message if you've got any statutory payments, any ongoing loans or anything like that. If you do select yes, that will actually clear down those values. So across tax years, those values might be something that you don't want to clear. So you do want to select no to that message. So don't let that catch you out. So I've got my successful message. That process is complete. And you can see my last updated date has changed back to March. So that's month 12 of last tax year. So I've rolled back my current year. The next thing I want to do is I want to roll back my previous year. So to do that, I'm going to change my processing date. I'm going to pop that back to the period I'm reprocessing, which is actually March. And then I'm going to repeat the process. So again, I'm going to go to tasks. I'm going to go down to rollback. I'm going to select next, confirm my employee. And there you can see we now have the dates available to us for last tax year. Now, luckily it is just March that I need to rectify, so I don't need to go back any further. So I'm going to select my tax month 12, select next, and then finish. So you can see now we've got a processing date in last tax year, so our last FPS date is of course month 12. All my other employees remain untouched, but employee 6 has now been rolled back to February. So again, I'm going to go and reprocess with the correct figures. So my processing date I've already changed. I'm going to go into enter payments. And I'm going to amend that bonus to £750. Save that change. And I'm going to rerun my payslip and any reports that I might need. Again, you can upload an online payslip and that will replace what was there. And I am then just going to lock in that change and update my records. Now, the submission for a previous year correction works a bit similar to the rollback. So you will want to do your submissions in chunks. So if you go back to a previous year, you would always reprocess to month 12. And you will always adjust against month 12 as well. So again, I can see my last updated and last FPS date are matching for this tax year. So when we do an amendment to a previous year, we do this a bit differently to an FPS adjustment. So first thing we want to do is we want to change our processing date to the last day of that tax year, so 5th of April 2025. Got our employee highlighted. And I'm not going to go into FPS adjustment. I'm going to go into e-submissions instead. And then I'm going to use my amend a previous tax year option. Select my reason as correction. And can continue with the adjustment there. So check my employee, the employee I'm expecting to see. So I can go ahead and submit that for month 12 of last tax year. Once month 12 is submitted for employee 6, remember I did remove all of my current year, so I would have to reprocess that employee back up to date as well. So that's both of my corrections done and submitted over at HMRC. Of course, I can view a log of that in the e-submissions log. So I can see my 2 adjustments there down at the bottom. You can always click for more details. Or if you want a bit more of a comprehensive breakdown, you can always check the FPS viewer as well. And that will show you the adjustment in greater detail. If you want to go even further, you can use the columns in the top right and you can select whatever fields that you want to see the information for. So a couple of places that you can look back to double check if you want that bit extra reassurance. So that is both of my corrections all done and dusted. So let's jump back to the slides. I appreciate that is a lot of information to digest. So I do just want to run through a recap of the 2 submissions that we've just seen and an extra slide on some more considerations as well. So first adjustment we made was the FPS adjustment, and that was for our current tax year. And that is submitted at the point where payroll is up to date again. So good rule of thumb for this one is if your last updated date and your last FPS date are matching again, then that is a good sign that you're now ready and at the point to send off your FPS adjustment. The FPS adjustment will send over your changes to HMRC. And again, I did mention this earlier, just something to note with this one. If you are correcting more than 1 pay period, the liability adjustment in that window will only show the differences for your most recent pay period, but nothing to worry about. Any other corrections or any previous months will go through in the year dates in the background. So long as you're happy with your reporting and what you've actually physically reprocessed, get it submitted and it will get it corrected with HMRC. We then looked at the amend previous tax year option. And remember, this does work the same as FPS adjustments, but for any previous tax years, you're making amendments to. So a couple of things to consider when submitting an amendment to a previous year. So you firstly need to submit it before reprocessing any of your current year. If you do have any later periods updated, it's not going to submit for you. Your processing date will also have to be changed to the 5th of April of the relevant tax year that you're correcting. And bit of a heads up with this one, if you do need to go back quite far, so if you're correcting tax years 23, 24 or earlier, if you can, use basic tools if you maybe only have a couple of employees to correct, or if not, you do want to reach out to technical support for a bit of further guidance for that one. And then last thing I want to touch on, not as common, there are some rare cases where you might not be able to submit an FPS adjustment through payroll. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about these scenarios today, but I have included these on the slide just so you have them handy in your handout. So definitely get those downloaded. Again, these are rare cases, but if you do come across one, then you're going to have this handout there to support you. And as always, there is more information just on the link at the bottom of the slide. We've made our corrections. To finish things off, I want to talk about some things to consider after you've actually made your correction. So it may be that you want to adjust your employee's pay on the next pay slip. So easiest way to do this is to compare the pay slip you saved before the correction and compare it to the new corrected pay slip. You simply then just find the difference in the net pay, and then you can make an additional payment or deduction for that amount. So I do just want to quickly bring the slides down one last time. If you remember rightly, I reprinted my payslips before my correction and also ran an updated payslip after my correction. So if we just take a little look at those. So we can see for employee 9, this was their original payslip. So if we check the net pay, you can see that was 2073.20. And if we look at the updated payslip for employee 9, we can see the national insurance has dropped off, and their new net pay is 2196.28. So I'm simply just comparing the net, and I can see that's a difference of £123 and 8 pence. So that's a payment that I can put on the next payslip in January, so the employee gets that money back. So that's just a bit of an example of what you would do with the pay slips. So nice and easy, and that's why it's so important to make sure you've got the relevant reports handy before you actually start your correction. Now, same kettle of fish with your P32 as well. So it might be the correction you're making is now going to mean that your HMRC liability is going to be different based on that. So again, very similar to the payslip. All you want to do is compare the original P32 that you've saved at the time with the new corrected P32. You want to look at the difference in line 21, and then you can either make an additional payment or deduct the overpayment from your next bill. So exactly the same as a payslip, but just for the HMRC side of things. There are some other things that you might want to double check after a correction, depending on how you process your payroll. So these might not be applicable to everyone. So does your correction mean that you've got changes in your statutory parental payments? If so, then you're going to want to submit your EPS again as well. So that will update the amount that you're reclaiming with HMRC, and it will send the corrected year-to-date values over to them. Is there going to be a change in pensions? So you might want to print some pension reports, look at the difference and settle any differences with the provider. And then finally, nominal link. So if you have already posted to your account software, you could post again and then reverse your original journals. Or you can correct the postings to file and then make a manual adjustment in your accounting software. So a couple different things you can do with that, but again, that is only going to be if you are using the nominal link. But we do also have a nominal link webinar coming up a bit later this month. So if you are wanting to know more about that, make sure to get signed up for that if you haven't already. So that is it for the content of today's webinar. I do want to finish things off by running through some further support. So this is our upcoming webinars in January. So we have a couple of statutory payments, so maternity pay and sick pay coming up. We have another session of mastering mistakes, and of course, one I mentioned earlier, nominal link. So we have a couple different dates and times for these ones. So make sure to get signed up for those if you haven't already, and hopefully see you on those. Do you want to shout out the help centre? So sage.co.uk/help. So you can also access this by clicking on the help icon in Payroll just next to your reports. You can get our technical support guides on there, our on-demand webinars, and info on how to get in touch with our Fab Tech support team if you need to. And last but definitely not least, we have our Sage Uni. So a really great resource, this one. You can do anything from bite-sized learning to full certifications. So you can really do it all at your own pace and choose what suits you. Just follow the link, so sageu.com, to explore. And best part about it is totally free to set up an account. So that is it for the webinar today. Before I go ahead and close the webinar down, I will stick around for the next few minutes or so, just to give Duncan a hand with any questions that might have came through. If you are leaving us at this point, you might see a short survey. If you do have 2 seconds to fill that out, that really would be appreciated. We do love reading all of your feedback. But with that said, let me pop on and mute for now, but I will see you all shortly to wrap the session up. Hi again, everyone. I really hope you've all enjoyed today's session. I will go ahead and close the session down in the next minute or so. As you exit, you will see a short survey. If you please can take a moment to fill that out, your feedback is really valuable to us. Would love to hear what you thought, what worked well, anything that can be improved so we can keep making these sessions even better for you. You will also receive a follow-up email later today. It'll have a link to today's webinar recording on there and info on how to register for any future sessions. But thanks again from me and Duncan for joining us today. Hopefully we will see you again soon. It is bye for now.